Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. But let's shift now to what was a hilarious and very cogent and powerful segment that John Oliver ran in his show
Last
week tonight. I was going to dyslexify that. Last Week Tonight, which is an HBO program, and that, like the Chewy tweet, got enormous viral exposure on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. So, David, why don't you tell us about that? What it said?
Sure. Totally endorse your characterization of it as hilarious. It was a great way to start my week. I watched it first thing Monday morning, and he sort of goes through the arc of antitrust, I don't even know, enforcement, I guess, over the years, and in particular, starting with the story of AT&T and how AT&T he made a very funny reference to a handwritten memo about AT&T executives talking about choking startup competitors before they got off the ground and all of this stuff. It was very funny, and it was basically an illegible memo that the Justice Department or some court had used to break up AT&T. But using that as an example of, hey, the breakup of AT&T is actually one of the reasons we have the internet in the first place, is that removing the stranglehold on the telco industry has spawned a whole range of new businesses and even new industries, and that something like that might happen if big tech were regulated and broken up in the same way. And in particular, he talks about Apple and Amazon. The most interesting piece to me was his Google piece. It referenced actually Rand Fishkin's SparkToro study of zero-click searches, that 65% of searches are answered by Google without a click through to the website, and talks about the self-preferencing of many Google properties at the top of search results. And it's a funny segment. I think it did a better job of laying out the problems that big tech oligopolies have created than pretty much anything else I've seen in the widely viewed press. It was hilarious. It kept you engaged for the full 26 minutes or whatever it was. And there's some really profound implications. He points out that the bills that are before the House and Senate right now, if they don't get passed before the end of the July session, that it's very unlikely they're going to pass in this Congress, and who knows what's going to happen after November. So the time is really of the essence, and hopefully his segment generates some kind of voter and consumer groundswell of support for these bills. Rand Fishkin then posted a Twitter survey to his audience, largely of marketers, asking how familiar people were with the two bills that are before Congress right now. And most people basically hadn't heard of them. I don't exactly know what his hadn't heard of them, in air quotes, option was in the survey, but it was a clear majority of marketers weren't even aware.
Almost 65% or something had
65% are just not paying attention. And he's right to call out the fact that these are going to have, if these bills pass, they're going to have just a profound impact on how marketers do their jobs, how we do our jobs to garner eyeballs and garner customers from the internet. And I don't know that it's entirely appropriate to speculate on exactly what the changes would be, but I have a feeling if, for example, the local pack is forced to go away because Google can't self-preference its own results anymore, that will lead to some big changes. Yeah. I don't know what those changes are going to be. It could be that there's more clicks on ads because the ads are now more visually compelling than the organic results. Who knows? But I do think it's going to have a big impact, and people should be paying attention to the outcome of these.
Yeah, bills. The two bills, just real quickly, we've written about them a number of times. There's the American Commerce and Innovation Act, I believe, if I didn't get the order wrong, and then the Open Markets Act. The Open Markets Act is really about app stores in particular, and the other one is the one that is much more sweeping and is designed to target so-called gatekeepers, the big tech companies who have control over access to different, search results, listings on Amazon, etc. And or I suppose the App Store in some cases. But this is the one that's really going to have the most sweeping impact, and the self-preferencing piece of it could be quite, as you say, quite profound. It's too early really to know exactly what that would mean from a practical enforcement standpoint, but certainly there would be consequences there that would be significant. So I just have to say that the example of a search that Oliver uses to illustrate zero click is totally
Very
hilarious.
funny.
It's this dolphin example. You have to watch this because it's so effective. He gets absolutely apoplectic about dolphins and their relationship to humans, and he goes through this whole Google SERP illustrating the zero click phenomenon. It's just brilliant.
Largely going down the rabbit hole of people also ask
Yep.
boxes, which I don't think is an
No.
atypical consumer behavior
No.
in any stretch. So
No, exactly. So, are we done?
Mike, did you want to say anything? I'm surprised
Yeah.
you're
The only
conspicuously
comment I have
silent.
about I don't
Yeah.
I can't speak intelligently to the laws. They're complicated laws. I haven't read all 400 pages. The one comment I have about both John Oliver and Rand is the tendency to moralize around behaviors in this context. We live in capitalism. We've decided, for example, that a 30% fee to run an app store is appropriate. It isn't. It is a problem when that app store becomes a monopoly, but that doesn't all of a sudden make it evil. And phrasing it in moral terms, I think muddies the conversation because it's the monopoly that's the problem, not the 30% fee. Because Sony, which has a monopoly in PlayStation's 80% of the market share, they charge 30%. Everybody else charges 30%. So if the fee is bad, it's bad every place. If it's inappropriate in the context of monopoly, then the conversation should be about the monopoly, not about the evilness of the 30%. And both Rand and John Oliver fell into that sort of laziness, which I object to.
Well, I think that's a valid point. However, I think when you've got companies that are affirmatively or willfully acting to prevent competition or to kill competition, then
well, that could be an immoral act, but charging 30% isn't.
by
right?
by
30%
itself,
is the standard.
I think that's right. It's just a question of what the tolerance of the market is for that kind of thing. The example that Oliver gives that's most, I think, consistent with the notion that a company is doing something willful to harm competition is the Amazon example, where he talks about them
Yes.
using they're using seller data.
knocking off that bag, I thought was just a really powerful example. That a small company had built this very cool
Fanny
backpack
pack,
thing, and
dad,
Amazon
whatever it is, dad pack.
dad
Yeah.
pack. I don't right. And I mean, Oliver just showed the two side by side. I think the company itself had produced this video just showing exactly how close of a knockoff it was. I mean, it was just incredible. And that Amazon had used the data about how popular that bag was selling to build their own Amazon Basics
Well,
version.
and
But this happens all the time in the grocery industry, though. I mean, it's a standard practice in the grocery industry. So the practice per se isn't the problem. It is in the context of limiting and injuring intentionally other business entities and the consumer.
well, you
right?
could argue that Amazon is just acting rationally, as you sort of impliedly do with your previous comment, that they're observing trends in the market. They seek to
It's assuming that capitalism is rational,
Well,
but in the context of capitalism,
we're
totally rational.
we're not going to.
That's right.
Right. We can have another debate about the capitalism as an economic system later, but in the context of capitalism, Amazon is just acting rationally, arguably, by observing trends, data that they capture, and then responding to that. Oh, this is a popular briefcase. We're going to create one that's similar. Now, where it bleeds over into bad behavior is when they're seeking to duplicate the product so closely that the consumer can't necessarily distinguish them. And then what Amazon often does is that they will put the cheaper Amazon, and then they underprice them. they will put the cheaper Amazon Basics version of the product on that page. So you'll see the room fan and the
Right.
Vornado fan, and it costs a certain amount. And here's the Amazon Basics version, which looks very, very similar, if not identical, absent the branding, and it's cheaper. And they suggest
So here's
and they suggest that to you. Why don't you buy this one?
a Walmart, a Walmart story for you. There was a local company that produced very high-end, high-quality pepper grinders, maybe salt shakers. Small local company that used locally sourced wood products to make a really nice pepper shaker. They were doing well. They got invited to meet with Walmart under a ton of NDAs. They brought all their stuff in, showed all their costs, talked about the product. Walmart never did business with them, but went sourced the product in China and put out a clone of it. And, so Walmart's been doing this for years, right? It not appropriate in either context, but Walmart, had Hillary Clinton on their
Got
board,
away with
was
it.
never investigated. Gets away with it. It's not even illegal. That's the problem with it. It's kind of, part of the problem is the lack of sort of clear laws in these areas, but the other is that if nobody's looking, it's happening.
Well, an example closer to home is the case of location, mobile location, and Skyhook Wireless, which was bought by somebody else a number of years ago. But in the beginning, Skyhook Wireless was a company that was providing databases of Wi-Fi and cell towers so that Google and Apple could triangulate user location based on that data. Both companies were customers of Skyhook, and then subsequently, both companies created their own versions of the Skyhook methodology and booted Skyhook. So that's an example of somebody who is using a partner, basically rips off the partner, and kills that relationship. And there's the antitrust police arriving now. And so that was a really blatant example. And I would even say, I mean, we're sort of starting to run over time, but there was another, at the risk of defaming our friends at Google, there was the whole Why Spy episode with the Street View cameras, right? You remember that?
Right.
Yeah,
I do. Where their engineer took the fifth.
Right, and they were capturing every single piece of data that they could. And one of the reasons for that was because they wanted location, and getting these Wi-Fi signals, capturing that would help them with location, make their location approach more accurate. Skyhook Wireless did a deal with Samsung, who at the time was the largest and probably still is the largest Android maker. They to provide location for Samsung phones, which meant that Google was going to be cut out of that relationship. So Google was not going to get location from Samsung phones anymore, hypothetically, if this Skyhook deal went through. And Vic Gundotra, who was at the time one of the higher ups at Google in the mobile program, intervened and killed that relationship because Google needed cell phone data to, at the time when this Wi-Spy thing happened, and they were no longer going to be able to get the Wi-Fi location data through Street View cameras, they needed the mobile phones to deliver that location information. Anyway, I'm going on and on and on about this, but that's bad behavior. It's an example of bad behavior, willful, quasi-monopolistic behavior. Google used its market power. They ripped off a partner. They used their market power to kill a business relationship. And that was
right.
that was
I think it's the market power is where this transitions from standard business behavior under capitalism to inappropriate business behavior. It's when it's the market power allows them to destroy
these bills are only focused on 5 companies. Basically, you have to cross certain thresholds of scale and volume in order for them to apply to you, which I think is kind of a bad idea. But I mean, there should be some threshold so small businesses don't get caught up in this. But they are only focused on Microsoft, Google, Apple, Facebook. Who's the Amazon? Yes,
Amazon.
There you go. So anyway, that's a kind of a dubious part of it from my point of view. But scale is the thing that triggers that, where it goes from just clever revenue maximization to monopolistic abuse of market power. But let's go back to Chewy for 1 second, so we can end on an opposite note, on a positive note. So that is a great story. Everybody who's listening to this, follow that example. Deliver great service, great customer experience, and your customers will do your marketing for you. There you go. All right, we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.